name is Joanne Foster, and I'm a member of the Social Justice Associates at South Church in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And I'm delighted to welcome Henry Klimtemowicz from the New Hampshire ACLU. He's the staff attorney there, and he's here to answer some of your questions about voting in the upcoming New Hampshire primary and general election, particularly in the midst of a pandemic. Henry, we've heard a lot of noise in the news lately that suggests that voting absentee by mail is not secure, that it's sort of fraught with fraud. And I'm wondering if you could tell me, what the percentage of fraud in absentee voting is.
Yeah, so thanks, Joanne. This is an important question because it's being talked about a lot sort of nationally. And what we know is that instances of voter fraud in New Hampshire are very, very small. Usually it's a handful in any given election at most. Out of 750,000 people could cast ballots in New Hampshire in 2020. So it's a really small number in general. And there's no evidence that I'm aware of that says that absentee voting is, for any reason, any particularly less secure. And it's also important to remember that folks who are voting absentee have already registered either by mail or in person. And there's a state, statutory process that's been set up by the state for that. It's been unchanged from what it used to be. The only difference is that now we're expecting more people to use the absentee voting system.
Great, thank you for that. So we certainly will expect, because of the pandemic, an increase in absentee voting by mail. And how do you think our cities and towns, the clerk's office, are prepared? Do they have the capacity to manage this increase?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting question. So as I said, 750,000 people could vote in a presidential election in New Hampshire. It could be more, it could be less, but that's around what it's been. And typically we see in New Hampshire anywhere between 7 to 10% of the population voting absentee in an ordinary year. But if this year the number becomes just 50%, which I think could be low, that means we're going to expect something like 300,000 new absentee ballots that we hadn't had in the past. So it is a big logistical challenge. And I know that the Secretary of State's office has been working on this. Cities and towns have too. It's important to remember that New Hampshire has a pretty localized election administration system. And so preparedness can really vary place to place. I will say people who are worried about their city or their town and how they're going to work to process absentee ballots, a great way to make sure that our elections run smoothly is to volunteer to be an election worker. And the best way to do that is to just call the town clerk or send them an email, or your city clerk, and say, hi, I've been reading about how there have been shortages of election workers across the state, and I'd like to sign up to be one. It's a great way to protect our elections while exercising your civic duty.
That's great. And would you also suggest encouraging people to request their absentee ballot sooner than later? Right.
Yes, well, that should go without saying. We don't know what's going to be going on with the post office as it tries to deal with this unprecedented crunch of absentee ballots in advance of the November election. But my view on it is the best way to protect the Postal Service is to request your absentee ballot and send it back in far in advance so that the demand for mail carrying gets spread out over as much time as possible. It's also worth remembering that you're allowed to bring back your absentee ballot in person to the town hall if you want to, and if you feel safe and that there's a way you can do that. And so that's a way to do it without putting any strain on the Postal Service at all.
Well, thanks, Henry, for answering these questions for us.
Thank you.